and I just want to welcome everybody on behalf of the North American SCI Consortium. I'm Barry Monroe. I'm currently a director and treasurer of the NASCIC, and I'm going to be your host today. Our esteemed president normally hosts the meeting is Ian Burkhardt. He is currently traveling in Europe right now and presenting, and he'll be back on board tomorrow. So I just want to saying thank you on his behalf. So today's agenda is basically going to be, we'll talk a little bit about our organization and what we do here. And we're really excited about having our two speakers here, Denise Fife and Jean Zenka. And I'll introduce them in a few minutes. And they're going to talk to you today about understanding caregivers, the unmet needs and resources, as well as the development of supportive interventions. It's going to be a great topic and something I think we all would like to hear about. And of course, what we normally do during our SCI Connections webinar, we defer our questions to the end of the presentation, if that's possible. But throughout the presentations, we urge people to please ask any questions in the chat, or even put your hand up if you'd like to be acknowledged and come on live. We can do that later on too, but all at the end of the presentation. So thank you. Next slide there, please. So just briefly, as many of you know, I see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces. We are the North American SCI Consortium. We were formed in 2018, and we really came out as a grassroots advocacy group. And our efforts were in the community to really bringing together and uniting all our efforts, and especially initially related to research, but then we've broadened beyond that. The idea is to bring together from coast to coast to coast and coast, many community-based organizations, partner organizations, and individuals throughout North America, and see where we can work together on common grounds. We have 62 community-led organizations. We have 359 individuals on their own and with lived experience, and we have 134 partner organizations, which includes the commercial world as well as academia and other not-for-profit institutes. Our mission is to bring about unified achievements in research, care, cure, and policy by supporting collaborative efforts across the spinal cord injury community. And to achieve this mission, we identify the gaps, we communicate resources, which we're really good at doing, and we try to be a conduit of collaboration between the community of people living with SCI and its many stakeholders. So on behalf of the North American SCI Consortium, I want to welcome everybody here today and our quarterly SCI Connections webinar. Next slide, please. To learn more about us or to become a member, or do you want to spread the word, please feel free to contact us this way through the QR code that's attached. This presentation will be sent to you as a recording after for joining today. So if you feel rushed right now, don't worry about it. We'll send this to you. And we also urge you to share, or if you want to go back and look at previous SCI Connections, we have them stored on our site and for 2024 and 2023. And we have QR codes for both of them there, as well as the link found at the bottom of this slide here too. So you'll see we've offered other very informative webinars over the past, but we're very fortunate today to welcome our two guests. The next slide is our presenters today is Jean Zenka and Denise Fife. Jean is the chair of the Institutional Review Board and assistant director of the Center for SCI Research at Kessler Foundation. And Denise Fife is an assistant director in the Centers for Spinal Cord Injury Research and Outcomes and Assessment and Research at the Kessler Foundation. And they have both lengthy bios, both current and past, I like to say, but feel free to look them up. They are absolutely dynamos in helping people with spinal cord injury and working with the community. They are 100% behind community involvement and the involvement of personal lived experience. And they are absolutely a wealth of knowledge and great people to work with. I can say that respectfully. We work with them closely on our SCI Connections, our SCI research advocacy course, and work with the Kessler Group and collaborating on some of the resources that we have, as well as helping us get the word out. And I can call, I think, both Jean and Denise friends. They've been just fantastic and are great supporters of both NASCIC and our community. So on that, I'm going to pass it over to you. And welcome you to our webinar today. And again, I ask everybody to think of any questions or even suggestions that they might have, to put them in the chat or save them to our Q&A at the end of the presentation. So take it away, ladies. Thank you.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much, Barry.
Barry.
Before I put up slides, I'll just take 1 minute to give a little more background on myself, and Denise will do the same. So as Barry said, my name is Jean Zanka, and we're coming to you from Kessler Foundation in West Orange, New Jersey. I'm a physical therapist by training and have worked in a research setting for more than 15 years. And for many years, I was interested in, or am still interested in, secondary complications of spinal cord injury, how to prevent them and manage them. And that's part of the pathway that took me into research related to caregiving, because caregivers, whether they be family or hired helpers, are so important in implementing many of the things that we therapists say should be done when folks are here in our presence, but really where the rubber meets the road is with those caregivers. And so I'm very honored today to have the chance to talk about some of the work that Denise and I have been doing. And I'll yield the floor to Denise to say a little bit more about her background.
Sure. Thanks, Jean. And thanks, Barry, for those kind words. Yes, hello, my name is Denise Fife. I am a clinical psychologist by training and joined the team here at Kessler here in West Orange, New Jersey, about 15 years ago. Much of my work has really focused on working with underserved groups who are living with spinal cord injury and really trying to address issues like related to maintaining functional independence after discharge, right? So living in the community and, adjusting to life with a spinal cord injury. And so, the involvement of the caregiver in those processes is extremely valuable and very instrumental in terms of sustaining functional gains over time. And so it was really, again, similar to Gina, sort of a direct path in terms of like just connecting with caregivers and in terms of understanding their needs and how we can support them. So welcome, everyone. We look forward to sharing our project with you.
Absolutely. So I'll just take a moment to bring up our presentation. All right. So as Barry mentioned, Denise and I are here to speak about some of the work we've been doing around identifying caregivers' unmet needs and trying to help develop resources to support them. Now, we are here as two people, but we are representing a much larger team of contributors to this work, including Autumn Pope, Sierra Gaither, Trevor Dyson Hudson, and our Caregiver Advisory Board, which has individuals with lived experience as partners or parents of people with spinal cord injury, and really has played an important role in helping us ask good questions and interpret what we're learning from the caregivers with whom we have spoken. So we're grateful to them, as well as to the support that we've received from the Model Systems, United Spinal, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, the VA, NASCIC, and many other organizations that we collaborate with. Denise found this beautiful quote from Rosalind Carter, and it says, "There are only four kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver." So as we speak today about the needs of spinal cord injury caregivers, everything that we say here is going to be relevant to everyone in one way or another, either in the context of SCI caregiving or perhaps in other caregiving roles you might have in your life as a sibling, a child, or a parent. So caregiving touches us all in different ways. There are three things that we want to talk about today. The first is to provide some information about a research study we've been undertaking, learning from the experiences of SCI caregivers. We'll talk about the background behind it and the goals of the study. Then Denise will describe some of the lessons we have learned from that project that we're carrying forward into our future activities. And we'll both talk about some new programs that we're developing to try to address some of the unmet needs that caregivers identified in this project. So first, some background. Here we share a few facts that have been learned over the years through a number of research studies that have been done about SCI caregiving. So in general, the average age of caregivers is 53 years old, and family caregivers, who we'll be focused on today, are predominantly female, which isn't necessarily a surprise. That's true for many populations, not just spinal cord injury. And as you might expect, the total hours and the type of care that a person with spinal cord injury may receive depends on the injury level and their care needs. And with individuals who have higher level injuries or more severe injuries needing more support than those who have injuries that are less severe. Because we've advanced in many ways in spinal cord injury care, people live for a long time with spinal cord injury, as many of you well know from your personal experience. It used to be that spinal cord injury was something people didn't survive. But now not only do they survive, but they live for many years after injury. So the average amount of time that an SCI caregiver has had that role can be between 40 to 50 years, almost a lifetime of caregiving. So it's really important that we try to identify their needs, how those needs might change over time, and be ready to support them through this long journey, both for their own well being as caregivers and for those that they are assisting. And something else that's been observed is that caregiver burden, which refers to the stress and strain of that caregiving role, tends to be higher among older caregivers. And so, as people age, we want to be ready to support them and to help them be able to be as successful as they can be, as well as the loved ones that they are supporting. Now, there are many things that family caregivers do. These are only some of them. They provide hands on help with daily activities for those who need that assistance. They're often advocates for the needs of their loved ones, whether that's being on the phone with insurance companies, perhaps talking to doctors and nurses on their behalf if they're not well enough to do so on their own, helping to manage communication between healthcare providers and others, all to help make sure that needs are met for their loved one. They're also a really important source of emotional support as one goes through the challenges of adapting to a spinal cord injury. And they're often a really important critical social connection, particularly as sometimes those other connections fade over time, which is something many people have told us they've experienced. And family caregivers also take care of a lot of the non spinal cord injury stuff. Depending on the situation of each individual family, they may be managing home maintenance and getting the lawn mowed and dealing with finances and managing kids. So, depending on each family unit's needs, those family caregivers have lots of different roles and responsibilities, only some of which are represented here. One of the things that we have learned from speaking with caregivers over the years is that spinal cord injury is life changing for them too, not just for their loved one with spinal cord injury. One of the things that struck me as in my time as a physical therapist is that we often have really high expectations for family. Somebody's come into the hospital, they've had this very significant injury, they suddenly need help with things they didn't need help with, and here we are asking families to kind of drop everything and come into the hospital and help, whereas they may have jobs and kids and all kinds of other responsibilities to deal with and didn't expect this to happen. And I think sometimes those expectations are not always reasonable, and that can be a source of stress. So that's one thing that caregivers deal with. Another challenge is changes in roles. We hear this particularly for partner caregivers of people with spinal cord injury, where they sometimes feel less like a romantic partner and more like a nurse. And that's a challenge for both members of that relationship that has to be navigated. There's often a lot of concern about their loved one with spinal cord injury's health and quality of care. And that can cause stress, and it also requires a lot of time to help advocate and support their loved one. Social isolation is also something that both caregivers and people with spinal cord injury can experience. We've often been told that there's a lot of help at the beginning when folks are first in the hospital, people are sending cards and letters and food, but over time, people may become less certain about how to help and fade away. And so isolation can grow over time and be a challenge. And then there's also the loss of personal identity. Becoming a caregiver sometimes means taking on new things that you didn't before, changing that role. And that can be a challenge and something to be grieved by the caregiver. So it's important for us all to recognize that when a spinal cord injury happens, it's not only life changing for the person who's experiencing that, for many of those around them too, especially their caregivers. Now, there's a lot of gaps in the current literature about caregiving. While there's a lot of research about experiences of caregivers, they tend to be focused on caregiver burden and other kinds of challenges, but they're not as focused on solutions. And we would ideally like to move in a direction where we can start not only identifying the challenges, but come up with ways to help support caregivers. And there's very limited work that sought caregivers' input about the services and supports that they feel are needed to meet their unmet needs. This information is really important to help us understand and try to reduce caregiver strain, to meet those unmet needs, and to improve access to support and resources that caregivers need. And so, this project that we've had the privilege to undertake really is helping us step back for a minute and learn what caregivers are feeling about what their needs are and what resources they would like to see available in the future. So the study had two major goals. to understand the perspectives of family caregivers of people with spinal cord injury about, first, their unmet needs related to services and resources for caregivers. Where are the gaps? What's falling through the cracks that needs to be addressed? And secondly, to seek their input on recommendations for how to address these needs, what services and supports they'd find useful to help them along the way. Now, with support from our Caregiver Advisory Board, we decided to discuss different topics with people with spinal cord injury who are caregivers or spinal cord injury caregivers in focus groups, which are just structured discussions around different topics. And there's 5 topics that we focused on, and we identified these with that guidance from our advisors who had lived experience as either parents or partners of people with spinal cord injury. The first topic was getting help from others, people's thoughts and challenges related to that. The second was finances, because they mentioned that there are a lot of effects on their lives, not only emotionally and physically, but also financially. Life stress, all the other stuff besides the spinal cord specific things that have to be managed and juggled. Relationships and how those can be changed by becoming a spinal cord injury caregiver, and also well being, both emotional and physical. So now I'm glad to invite Denise to speak about some of the things we have learned from this research so far.
Thanks, Jean. Next slide, please. So first, I just want to share this image and these numbers all around this image just sort of summarizes the caregivers that we've spoken to over the past year and a half. We have spoken to 64 caregivers, both here in the United States, also in Canada. And so let me tell you a little bit about them and who we spoke to. On average, they were about 52 years of age. Almost 2/3 were reported that they were married. The majority of them reported or self-identified as being a female. We actually just started recruiting, expanding our pool of participants to start recruiting men as well as parents, but we'll talk about that in just another second. So this is why that number is also probably pretty low, but we're refocusing our efforts a little bit there. So anyway, moving on, about 80% of our caregivers are partners. And again, parents is a new group that we're targeting as well. Most of our participants self-identified as white or Caucasian. And but about 70% of them have a bachelor's degree, so highly educated group. And over half, are reporting having a household income of 75,000 or more. So in terms of finances, again, we're also trying to target changing our focus and trying to expand that a little bit as well, to try to recruit more individuals with a lower income. But anyway, again, we'll get to that in a second. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, about 42% report that their incomes are over, their income covers their needs pretty well. Almost half. We'll talk about finances in another second when we can dive into that a little bit more. And then about 44% spend about 10 to 25% of their income for the needs of their loved one, based on their SCI needs. So that could be DME or those kind of things. So what I'm going to do now with this next set of slides is go through those 5 topics that Jean mentioned that we prepared with our Caregiver Advisory Board, and just highlight. I just want to orient you to the slide. So we have numbers on the left-hand side and words on the right-hand side in that. So what we did was in asking our questions, we asked questions via survey. And that's what you see summarized here on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, like we said, we had focus group discussions that pertain specifically to these topics, right? So this topic about getting help from others. This is one sample question from our survey that asks, has anyone else ever provided unpaid help to your loved one with SCI during the last 12 months? And we see 60% reporting yes, and about 40% reporting no, right? So wanting to understand why we we administered the survey and asked these open-ended questions and had these focus groups so that we could learn a little bit more about the why behind the numbers, right? I think the numbers tell us one story, but when we get into it, we want to make these numbers really meaningful to our stories and how we report the information. So one of the challenges that some of that one of our caregivers mentioned about getting help from others is like it's like your friends or family members. They go to your home and they see, but they really don't understand what you're going through or how to help. So that was one challenge that some families reported. Other families reported really that, you know, within their families, that's just not the way that they work together. They work together, and that's how they've structured it, and they don't ask for any kind of unpaid help or any assistance at all. So there's some variation in terms of, you know, there's more than one way to help one another and live with one another. So, but this is just one example of a challenge with that. But then we also have other individuals who, like you said, do offer do get assistance and have had assistance. This caregiver mentioned, you know, I had a meal train, we had food, I had, you know, we didn't cook for 6 months. My family was always offering, and family was always offering help. So that was just one example of a helpful strategy in terms of and we also talked about like the types of help that people were receiving, right? It wasn't, it varied in terms of help, and we'll show a few other examples as well. But having, yes, this is just one topic, and we can go to the next slide to talk about the next topic. We also talked about finance, and we actually spent a lot of time in this. Even though there's one slide here, there's a lot of other data behind this, but let's just share one set of slides, one slide on this topic. So again, on the left here, we asked on our survey, as a result of having providing care to your loved one, have you taken on more debt, whether it's credit cards, loans, lines of credit? And it was sort of a 50-50 split, right? Very close to a 50-50 split across the folks who said yes and the caregivers who said no. And the challenges that some of our caregivers reported was that, you know, that they had to, like, well, this one example, we had to buy almost everything. You know, he got a power chair when he left rehab, and that was it. We had to buy everything else. We had to have a lift in the garage so he can come in the house. And so that came out of pocket for this this family. And you know, we've had a number of other stories related to, like, you know, accessibility in the home, improving accessibility in the home, and that coming out of pocket as well. And in addition to other out of pocket expenses as well. But we know spinal cord injury is an expensive injury to live with. Not just for the person who's living with the injury, but for their family as well. So that was just one example of the challenge that they experienced, this family experienced. In terms of helpful strategies, you know, this family, you know, there was a small GoFundMe page that was, you know, less than 5,000 that somebody did, and that helped to cover the cost of some of the things. And we know that, you know, from our conversations that people have had to become very innovative in the ways that they've, you know, offset the cost of living with a spinal cord injury for them and their families. And other folks, other caregivers and other people living with spinal cord injury also have used another resource I'm not sure if folks have heard of, is Help Hope Live, as another resource. And that's that definitely it supports people living with disabilities in I think in different ways than the GoFundMe page in terms of the tax, the tax implications, because we know that GoFundMe has a tax implication. So, but I'm just mentioning that as another resource, as we're talking about resources as well that folks might want to think about, the audience might want to think about. Next slide, please. So, as Jean mentioned, you know, we know that there are other things going on in people's lives. In addition to caring for their loved ones, our caregivers also talked about, you know, feeling stressed by their loved ones' SCI. And, you know, we have about, you know, you know, in terms of like we have some individuals over here that are reporting, quite a bit completely, in terms of feeling stressed. But, there's some level of stress that most of our caregivers reported. It varied. No one said it was a constant thing, but for this individual in particular, they said, the day-to-day stresses that you might have, work problems or this problem throws you completely into an upside down world, and you have no way to figure out how to navigate it, and your life has completely changed. But what was wonderful, I have to say this, what was wonderful about our caregiver focus groups, and still is, because they're still going on, we'll talk about that in a second, is that our caregivers were so supportive of one another that even in talking within our groups and talking about the different stressors, life stressors, while caring and loving for your loved one, everyone was helping everyone in the group about ways that are identifying ways that they could support one another, or have you tried this strategy, or did so this was as much as this group, we gathered information, our caregivers, they really helped to support one another and developed really, I think really friendships by the end of it, because they were sharing phone numbers and figuring out ways to support one another after the focus group. So I really, this has been a wonderful opportunity to facilitate those connections between our caregivers as well. A helpful strategy that this caregiver recommended this first year we came home, his sister showed up, once every week or every 2 weeks and just mowed the lawn. I was grateful that someone just showed up and did it. This person went on to say, I think just thinking even about the help aspect of it too, not having to tell someone what to do or how to do what they had to do was also, it sort of took the stress off as well. So in this instance, yeah, that's knowing that there's also the home maintenance, managing the household, and figuring out different ways to do that and getting support to do that can be helpful as well. Next slide. So we also talked about relationships, how much do you agree or disagree with this statement? I've had a problem with my marriage. So on the left-hand side here, we have, about 43% of our respondents disagreeing with that statement. And then on the right-hand side, we have about 40% who said that they had some problems with their marriage. And so, and again, that experience we know varies across individuals, but some of the reports or stories from our caregivers reported that, that their relationship completely changed. I was not his wife anymore. I was his caregiver, and how the implications of that on how they either were communicating, or the lack thereof. Those implications were mentioned as follow-up comments. In terms of helpful strategies, some of our caregivers talked about, well, this one example, they've gone to marriage counseling and that seemed to help. Others talked about, setting up very clear boundaries, with their loved one in terms of, when things get to a certain point, we know we need to separate or do something different, and then come back and reconvene and have a conversation. So again, the helpful strategies in talking about ways that they can manage their relationship and the changes that they've experienced. Next slide, please. So then well-being. So we had a number of, again, survey questions that related to physical. So what we did was with well-being, we split it up into physical well-being and emotional well-being. Even though they're related, they're different as well. So we wanted to make sure we could also help people address those two types of well-being. So we asked questions about both. What I'm sharing with you though here is just an overall health question. My health has suffered while caregiving, and with this question, our caregivers talked about whether or not they strongly disagree with this question, or they whether or not they actually strongly agreed. And here with well-being, we have about 33% disagreeing with this question, and about 50% agreeing. an example quote, a sample quote here is, I thought, I'm strong, I'm good, I can do whatever I was able to do. I was able to do everything, but I didn't realize I was killing myself in a way because I was not having a life, because my husband was my life, and that was not good for anyone. And in terms of a helpful strategy, our caregivers definitely talked about ways that they could, help themselves as well as their loved one by taking care of themselves, you know? And so this caregiver mentioned that, I love to read, scholarly stuff, maintaining social life, going out with my girlfriend for breakfast, things like that, just that kind of maintaining that part of my life. And so these are just some examples of stories and comments that our caregivers made. And so, based on these results, not just based on these results, but also based on the literature, it really helped to inform some new programs that Jean and I developed. And we want to share those with you in the last few minutes of our talk. Jean, back to you.
That's good. So as Denise mentioned, there are a few programs that we've been developing, and many of these developed in parallel with the project that we're working on and just kept getting reinforced as we kept having more conversations with our caregivers. So one of them is called the SCI Community Connect program. And the goal of this program is really to augment center-based caregiver training. So for those folks who did have the opportunity to get into inpatient rehab, which we acknowledge is not everybody, there's a tendency for the caregiver training to be very concentrated, often in the last days, sometimes the last hours of that rehabilitation stay. If you didn't go to rehab, that might be crammed into that acute care stay or somewhere else. But we know that caregivers, and their loved ones leave the hospital, go home, and things are different in the real world. Or if needs change over time as you age, or your body's different, or your needs are different. You become employed, or there are family needs. Things pop up over time, and what used to work may not still work the same way. So the gap we wanted to fill was really two things: opportunities for people with spinal cord injury and their loved ones to ask questions of knowledgeable clinicians without having to do it in the context of a doctor's appointment, for example. Because sometimes you just have a question and you just need an answer to something. So the Community Connect program includes Zoom sessions with experienced clinicians to ask questions and perhaps to assess additional needs. And for New Jersey residents, there's also the opportunity for home-based caregiver training, where we have experienced PTs and OTs that can come into the home and help train on transfers, ADLs, equipment use, other things, to really build on, adjust that caregiver training that hopefully happened in the inpatient rehab setting, but that still needs to be built upon in the community. The program's open to hired or family caregivers, and contact with the program can either be initiated by a caregiver who is seeking out additional training, or perhaps by a person with spinal cord injury who would like to connect their caregiver, be it a family caregiver or perhaps a new hired caregiver, with specialized training from SCI clinicians on skills related to spinal cord injury. And we've built the program so that we're also providing compensation for childcare coverage that might be needed and for time spent in training. So if, for example, you're somebody with spinal cord injury and you're working with a hired caregiver and you'd like them to get some education or training, but that would also mean paying them more hours of time, and that's something that the program can help offset so that we reduce those barriers to being able to participate in the program. The Community Connect program involves sort of a two-phase intake process. First, there's a very brief questionnaire that you can either do directly online or on the phone with our program administrator, and we'll give contact information later on for the programs we're about to discuss. Then the staff team meets together, talks about the needs that were identified in those intakes, and makes a training plan. Then we start with Zoom calls to try to address just informational kind of questions right off the bat, and then assess appropriateness for home training and plan for that going forward. And the program allows for up to 16 hours of home-based training for folks that are in our geographic area. Now, in addition to Community Connect, which is a little more clinical in nature in that it's connecting families with clinicians, we also want to connect caregivers with other experienced caregivers because they have a lot of wisdom to share from their own experiences and can help provide some emotional support because they've been through it and they understand what the experience of being a caregiver is like, perhaps in ways that other professionals don't. And so we've developed an SCI caregiver peer mentoring program that pairs family caregivers seeking support with experienced caregivers caregivers who are willing to give it. And our mentors are trained through the SCI Peer and Family Support Program at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. And it's been a very nice win-win situation for us. We've been glad to benefit from the excellent program that they have already structured at the Reeve Foundation. And we've also been able to augment their pool of caregiver mentors by having them trained through that program. We've recruited 10 mentors thus far, and the mentoring is mostly done remotely, typically by phone or Zoom. But for those who are in our geographic area, there is the possibility of in-person mentoring as well. And with that, I'll have Denise now speak about the SCI Navigator program.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Jean. So I guess the complementary of the sister program to the Community Connect program, over the past year or so, we've also developed here at the Kessler Foundation the SCI Navigator program. And this program provides educational and supportive resources to people with SCI and their family caregivers to address barriers as they transition along the continuum of care and while they're at home. And our program, our navigators are able to provide support for up to 2 years. Next slide, please. So what do navigators do? Well, there's a lot that they do to support caregivers as well as people with SCI. I'm going to focus on the ways our navigators have been supporting our caregivers in the community and also while they're here at the hospital. So in terms of administrative support, I would say that that's more something that they've done well, because our navigators are able to go home and work with our families in the community. They're able to go home and help organize, whether it's organizing health insurance information, while whether it's trying to sort out, they're getting, 3 or 4 different quotes on, accessibility, sorting through all of those, that kind of documentation. That's one example of that. In terms of advocating for their for caregivers as well as their loved one with SCI. I mean, I think it's really advocating for them, like helping them figure out, transportation services. That's been one way, and empowering them with the kinds of questions that they need to ask, and helping them try to figure out how to advocate for themselves in terms of also in terms of home accessibility, or if it's even helping them navigate the wheelchair, their wheelchair prescription, getting the wheelchair in the home, and just navigating that whole experience as well. And sometimes it's just finding the words, and if it is the right words, if you will, sometimes to express as you're navigating those experiences. Our navigators are helping with that and helping so that we are empowering caregivers while they're navigating those experiences. Anyway, so care coordination. So that transition home, the transition home to the home setting, helping our caregivers as well as their loved one, come back to the hospital for that first outpatient visit, thinking about everything, and I mean everything that's related to, that first visit back home, everything they need to think about in terms of whether it's transportation, how much time they need to get ready, how much time would they need to get ready to get to that appointment, what else needs to be taken care of, insurance. I mean, think about advocacy and admin and care coordination if there's an insurance issue. So those kind of things, case monitoring. So we have a real comprehensive needs assessment that our navigators do at the beginning of the program to identify problems that we can assist with, barriers that our caregivers might be experiencing, and we're really trying to help them figure out, so in terms of goal setting and reassessment, goal setting is something that really helps our navigators work with our caregivers to really target, what are we going to focus on first and prioritize? Because there could be a laundry list of different concerns and problems, but working together with the caregiver, making sure that it's, their goals and their needs are, they're really contributing to or identifying and prioritizing what their goals and their needs are. So that happens throughout our encounters with our caregivers. In terms of community outreach, so connecting people with different community organizations, whether they're local, whether they're across, depending on the needs, has been also a major focus of our program. And one way we're able to do that is, one, because of all the community organizations that helped, that gave us input to while we were developing the program, but also over the past year, we've also developed a community resource library. And that's been very helpful. And Katrina Casal, our program administrator, I think, is on this call. And so she's, helped us develop the library, and all of our navigators have contributed to that, as well as our research team. And that's been a wonderful benefit. And then, like I mentioned, with our community, our focus groups, we've had a wonderful opportunity to share. That's been a wonderful opportunity to share resources across our caregivers. And that's also helped to populate our library as well, and one another. Education, I think that in terms of managing secondary health conditions and things that caregivers can do, as well as educating them about self-care, right? And identifying their needs, and how, in spite of everything else that's going on, what are some small things that you can do for yourself? That's something else that we've also helped with. And then in terms of addressing barriers, so our navigator team includes occupational therapists, social work, mental health professionals, and a peer. And so addressing barriers, whether when it comes to the home life and navigating your space, that's also been something that our navigators have been able to help with, whether that's a home visit, right? And we also conduct home assessments to assess the accessibility aspects of a person's home, whether it's a caregiver, person with an SCI. Next slide, please. So, wow, we shared a lot. And you might be wondering, wow, how could I get involved with these programs that Denise and Jean have going on? Well, we're here to share some information about that. And so we've gone through our didactic portion, but now we have a couple of shameless plugs. Okay.
Go ahead. Take it away.
So our focus group study is, like I said, it's still ongoing. And so if you would like to, if you or someone that you think might be interested in being a part of this, our focus group study, we have our QR code for the study that's up here on the left-hand side, and our recruitment flyer. Actually, we'll share that with Barry and Gabby, and maybe they could share it with the participants from today's session, and to disseminate that as well. And it has the QR code on it, and then I'll turn it over to Jean. Not sure if there's anything else that you want to add there.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And as Denise was mentioning, while we welcome all referrals, as you see in the pictures on this slide, we're particularly wanting to increase the areas where we've had less representation. So caregivers who are male, while they might be the smaller proportion, they are no less important. And so we're trying to increase that representation in our sample, and also parents of people with spinal cord injury. So everybody's welcome, but in particular, think about those individuals. And also, as Denise said, when we first recruited from people who are often involved in our work, there's a bit of a tendency for folks to be more highly educated, a little better resourced, and we really want to be able to get the full spectrum of experiences. So if you fall in any of those groups, we really welcome those nominations so we can hear all of those perspectives. With respect to the Community Connect program, if you're interested in finding out just more information, you want to start there, you're welcome to contact Stephanie Almonte, who is our program administrator. Her phone number is up there, and it'll be in the recording once this is posted. And you can also reach us at communityconnect@kesslerfoundation.org. There's also a QR code on this slide that lets you complete a brief intake questionnaire to get a little information about you and maybe some areas that you're interested in learning about. Then Stephanie will reach out out, clarify your needs, and talk about next steps, which usually would be, again, a Zoom call with our clinicians. That's open to everybody, no matter where they live. And we hope that's a good forum to get some good questions answered. And even if you're not close enough for us to be able to give in-home services and caregiver training, we can certainly provide some guidance on other ways to get that accomplished. If you're interested in the Caregiver Peer Mentoring Program, Angela Smith here at Kessler Foundation is the program coordinator. She's also an SCI caregiver herself, or a former SCI caregiver, as her husband has passed on, but she has so much wisdom that she wishes to share. We're so grateful to her for taking on this role. She can be reached at the phone number you see, or at SCI Caregiving at kesslerfoundation.org. And we also have a brief web form that folks can complete if they prefer to reach out to us that way. And then Angela will reach out to you and find out more about your needs. And then regarding navigation, Denise can say more about connecting there.
Yes. So in terms of navigation, we have this is our website, and I can actually put the link to the website in the chat as well. Or actually, you know what? Could I ask someone on my team to maybe put it in the chat if they're able? I don't know if they're allowed to, but I think that they can. I think it's open to everyone, right? Okay.
So.
If someone from my team could put our website in there, I'd appreciate that.
Gabby, could you put that in the chat, please, right now? The links, that'd be great.
Thanks so much. So yes, this is the link to our website, and also our QR code. And our QR code will take you to our Navigator Manager and Program Administrator, a link to their email address for you to learn a little bit more about the program. But yeah, our webpage summarizes gives you an overview of the program, as well as connecting you with the team.
That sounds great. And I should also have mentioned for Community Connect, I believe Stephanie Almonte is in the chat now. So if anybody wants to chat her directly, you can do that too. And she'll be happy to reach out to you. And there's many members of the navigation team as well, if there's somebody you want to nominate, but you can use the chat as well if you're interested. I see a couple of chats coming through. Thanks so much for sending those links. That's great.
Thank you.
And then we just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to share these programs with you today and what we've been learning. And we've reserved some time to ask questions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the share so that we can see each other a little bit better, and welcome you to ask any questions you like.
So the floor is open, everybody. Feel free to put your hand up or acknowledge that you'd like to ask a question, and we can take that on. If you'd rather just send it in the chat, we can handle it that way too. And as we're waiting for that, I just wanted to ask briefly, maybe seek clarification. All of these great resources that you've been talking about, which is fantastic. And of the virtual ones, are they really available nationally for anybody that wanted to tap in?
Yeah, they are.
Yes.
So, Denise, do you want to speak to navigation? Because you've already got a pretty broad reach, as I recall.
Yes, we do. So, because of our resource, I mean, depending on the need, right, Barry, because I mean, while we would love to travel to Canada and across the world, but we can help with resources, or help people with SCI and their caregivers sort of navigate, finding resources. And like I said, it's been wonderful. We do have international resources. I mean, we've just been doing a lot of legwork in terms of pulling together this library. So we actually have a number of resources that we can use to support people across the country. Yeah.
That's fantastic. We do have some questions. I have one from Art, and then Kim. Did you want to say something before I mention that? Or?
Just very briefly, while the Community Connect program has that in-home component that is more geographically limited, the opportunity to talk to an SCI clinician via Zoom is not. That's open to everybody. And very often, even if they're not able to give you hands-on training, they can identify other sources you could go to get that training. So if you want to be able to ask a question of a physiotherapist or an occupational therapist, and you don't want to waste a visit, or it's not convenient to go to a clinic and do that, they're available to help answer those questions. And the mentoring program is generally happening all virtual anyway, so it really doesn't matter where you are.
Perfect. So Art, if you can unmute, or is that Gabby unmute Art? There we go. Go ahead, Art.
Basically, I just kind of have the opposite thing of being the person with a spinal cord injury who is a caregiver. We've got a multidisability household where I'm the more able-bodied member of the family, where my girlfriend lost her vision during the early lockdown because of a cancer drug, and lots of other treatments that basically she's essentially homebound, and it's been very stressful trying to deal with both my needs and her needs, and kind of transitioning from her being my caregiver to my being her caregiver.
Absolutely. I think that speaks a bit to that Rosalind Carter quote that we heard at the beginning about being caregivers, and people with spinal cord injury are people too, which means that they have all the same roles that other people will have, aging parents, kids, loved ones with that help. So, feel free to make use of different resources that we have. I think our general philosophy is, even if we might not be the experts, say, in needs for somebody with low vision, but we might have some ideas to offer, and we'll do our best to connect you to other resources. So, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help however we can.
Unfortunately, because she has so many different things, and multidisability is there. I mean, the local Carroll Center, which is like a top-rated school for people with newly acquired blindness, essentially told her, "Go away. You're too disabled for us to help you."
Yeah, that's an unfortunate approach. So, thank you for raising that perspective, Art. That's really important for us to remember.
And if there's anything we can do to support you, Art, I mean, reach out to us about supporting you as well as you're trying to navigate that space.
Yeah.
Okay,
a lot of the
thank you.
resources that the navigation team and others have identified are not necessarily just SCI specific. They can cross disability groups as well.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, feel free.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Art.
that's a good point.
Thank you.
Kim Anderson, our former president of NASCIC, has a question there. Go ahead, Kim.
Hi. I have a comment and a question, and actually an additional comment. I'm so glad that you guys were presenting this with NASCIC, because I missed your session at the Asia meeting about this. Comment kind of related to what Art was just talking about. It would be great to have resources for people with spinal cord injuries that then become caregivers, because I'm also in that situation where my father has Parkinson's to the extent where I'm their caregiver now, particularly with coordinating all of their care and resources and their aides that come in and all of that. So those resources would be beneficial for people with spinal cord injuries as well. My question is, for all three of the programs, the SCI Navigator, the caregiver, where you can connect with a clinician, and then the mentoring, are these all being operated under research, or what is your financial sustainability model to get these persistently available via the hospital?
Yeah.
Because I want my hospital to do that.
I know, it's a great question. We don't have a solid answer, but we have some thoughts. I mean, at the present moment, they are all privately funded. So, there's been a lot of focus recently on government funding, but I think this is one of those situations that does remind us that there are people with resources who want to do good in the world. And because of that sort of non-traditional funding source, we're actually implementing them as programs first.
Okay.
We're collecting data on their outcomes as part of evaluating them and being able to make a good case for them going forward. But they are programs first. There are, I think, some private pay models for navigation type services that I've seen out there. A lot of the peer mentoring kind of work. I mentioned that we were partnering with REAP, so there's already that infrastructure, and we just helped feed more mentors into that by trying to join forces. I wish I had a better answer, so I'll pause in case Denise has more wisdom than I think these days we're trying to be creative. I think we're trying to look for
Definitely
the many sources out there in the world that are trying to do good things and just need to have suggestions made to them about how to do it. In the private world, I think that's probably going to be the most likely model for the short term. And if that is what it is, then we'll pound the pavement. But our hope is with these projects to demonstrate the difference they make, so that whoever the funder is, that we can make a compelling argument that this work needs to continue. And there's also resource libraries and other resources that don't necessarily require ongoing maintenance or personnel that we hope will live for a long time as well. But it's a great question, Kim, that we ask ourselves every other day, and we'll continue to do so.
Yeah, and actually we've had to, in terms of funding, particularly for caregiver projects, it's sort of asking a different it's a question about caregiving, but I've noticed, at least in our latest searches for funding and sustainability, thinking about sustainability, is that a number of a lot of this work has been done in the aging population, and so it's sort of. So there are some other funding mechanisms. I think we have to sort of again be innovative and maybe change our spin, or or the way we submit grants related to this, and think about thinking about those other organizations or private foundations or things like that are actually, focusing on specifically caregiving. I can only really speak to that at this point, but caregiving. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting search. But there also are some organizations, though, too, that are looking to support caregivers. So AARP has a policy. There's a policy piece, right? That I think that's also on the rise as well. And there are new policies that are being implemented as well to support caregivers as well, right? Whether it's having to do with supporting, docs training caregivers and, being able to bill for that, so I think we're having to approach it in a different way. I'm sharing sort of like, it's just sharing all the ways I've just sort of approached the searches I've done. But it hasn't really been that systematic. I got to be honest with you, Kim, and it's just sort of been like, oh, look at this. And also just sharing, I think, stories as well, with particularly in terms of like the policy piece. It's also been like sharing some stories, and then on the policy side, folks, sharing different ways that they've had their work funded. So that's the long way of getting to that answer. But
and I think also part of the data collections around, I think this might be more true. Well, it could be true for both Navigation and Community Connect, but to the extent that we are trying to help answer questions and maybe get people back to services that they had been disconnected from, that's generating billable units. So we can sort of try to talk about how this helps bring people into the system, customers in that you're otherwise losing. There's different arguments we can make, but if you all have ideas, we'll take them too, and we keep our feelers out there.
Right, all in the spin, right?
There's several of us here in Cleveland would be very happy to collaborate with you on future projects.
Amen, Kim. That's what I'm chiming in, because amen, Kim. Sasha Repchevsky. Kim, this is exactly what we need to do, and it's not about money, it's about networking. Well, let's talk about this when we talk next, Kim, okay? This is amazing. Thank you all for having this.
Yeah, it was excellent. Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
A question from our Vice President of NASCIC, Jared Kerr, in the chat. I don't know if you get a chance to read that. If you want to comment, go ahead.
Yes.
I think, well, Denise, do you want to, have there been navigator experiences that connect with this that you want to talk about first? And then
definitely in terms of how to communicate with your loved ones. I mean, so definitely concerns have come up, and thinking about different approaches to so Jared, actually, that definitely came up, and Jean and I have been talking about, and looking at the data, how do we address this one? And this is definitely one on the list. I will say that we haven't, we don't have an intervention so far, I think, that really addresses that. But I think that there are definitely ways that again, going back to some of the other research that we've taken a look at that talks about the communication piece among carers and their loved ones. That's definitely something that we're looking into. I'm sorry I don't have an official answer for you, though, but it is a concern that came up, and if you can stay tuned, and if I find something, though, that's specific. So there's been problem solving therapy, right, as in terms of an intervention, and thinking about communication. That's definitely been an approach that some individuals have used in terms of managing those conversations. There's actually been more information about the conversations between caregivers, their loved ones, and the healthcare professionals than there has been actually about one another that I've seen, particularly in terms of like SCI. There have been a few people who've done it in terms of SCI, but yeah, sorry. Problem solving therapy and is definitely one that I've heard a lot about to facilitate communication.
Absolutely. And in terms of the issue of the repository of caregivers, Jared, I'm not necessarily aware of a massive one, but I will say a former patient of ours has established an organization called Lean on We, and I will put that in the chat in a minute. It is probably more geographically focused for here, but it's a very interesting model in that it's a referral model. It's not an agency, but he's got caregivers that he has vetted and that are part of a pool, and then you do privately hire them, but they've gone through some checks and so forth already, and that model I think has been very helpful. We've had some conversations about this in the past. I'm still trying. I haven't yet been successful in getting a companion course to the one that we created for personal care assistants, which I can also put a shameless plug for in the chat in a little bit. That might help communication, because when they don't understand, like, why is it that why do you keep it so warm? It's because I can't regulate my temperature. I'm not trying to boil you out of my home. These kinds of things can sometimes be sources of misunderstandings that can be addressed. So we do think education is big. I've not yet been successful in getting the course for people with spinal cord injury and their families about finding caregivers funded. So that is something that I would like to keep working on, to use that same model that worked really well for the personal assistance course and try to get that funded. I also think there might be some opportunities for us to take advantage of education and speakers in sort of a corporate context who are talking about, communication skills in other contexts. But if you're essentially an employer if you're working with hired caregivers. And a lot of the management kinds of courses that are out there might well have some value. They're just out in business land and not in healthcare land, so we tend not to pay attention to them. But I think there's some opportunities for us to leverage some of those kinds of resources as well that are still untapped. So, none of this is a perfect answer, except to acknowledge that yes, communication is really key, whether that's the interpersonal aspect, if it's a family member that you're working with, or whether it's more of the professional aspect if you're working with a hired caregiver, and we'll keep working on those resources.
And I think some of the peer navigation pieces, I think that's, I think in terms of, having someone who, another caregiver who is maybe, going through the same thing, and this is the way that I handled it. I'm not saying it's the only solution. I just think it's just one of many ways that our caregivers are helping to manage some of the communication issues that they might be having.
You make some great points. We're at near the end of time here, and I'll just everybody else if they have any questions. You got one last shot, and I noticed that Spring Hawes has mentioned, is there a link to the caregiver training you can share? So it's in the chat. There are chats, and we are going to Spring. We're going to be sending you the presentation and a taped copy of this webinar again to all the attendees today, as well as eventually it goes up on our site. So all the information that was given today will be sent out to all of you who have attended, so you can go back and look at these. And then, of course, the contact information for Jean and Denise. They're so accommodating, and they're always out there for us. There's something I want to touch on, and Jean, you touched on it just at the end, and it was very important what you said, and I just wondered how it gets picked up is the training for a person with a spinal cord injury, because when we have our accident, and if we are dependent and our need the need for caregiving, that's the first time in our lives that we're all of a sudden put in that role, and it's an interesting dynamic, then especially if it's with family and how someone navigates it. I just wonder if there's any kind of resources apart from what you mentioned, the management courses, where they become this instant employer / instant director of care in the household, how they manage that, because I know that can cause a lot of stress in a household, and from my personal experience, I can say that, but I just wondered how you may or may not address that part.
Yeah, I think one of the first things I might point to, they're a little dated, but there's still some principles in them that shine pretty brightly. So Paralyzed Veterans of America has a guide on managing personal care assistance
Perfect.
that has a lot of useful information in it. Shepherd Center has also published a guide. So that's something, I don't know if I have them on my fingertips in the next 2 seconds, but I'll try to get those to you. But that's something that I would lean on as well. There's some good tidbits in there. And, on a one-to-one basis, those are also some strategies that could be worked on in Community Connect and navigation, and we'll keep our eyes peeled for other resources as well.
That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, we are out of time, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming together and putting this presentation on. As Sasha said, this is an absolutely incredible resource that you're providing, and the information you're doing, and very needed, and sort of an untouched part of overlooked, frankly, in our whole spectrum of care and how we move forward in managing spinal cord injury. So again, thank you for the work that you're doing, and be prepared, because there's some great people out here that'll be asking you more questions and coming at you. But also, I think there's also people in here that want to collaborate and as well could provide resources of their own that might be regional. So again, that's what we do here at NASC, try to connect everybody together. But thank you for coming together today and making your presentation to us. It was very excellent, and we're very pleased to have you. So a reminder, everybody, this will be available, and the tape presentation, along with any kind of links and resources attached, will be sent to you as an attendee. And we feel, please share them with anybody you think could benefit from this great resources that Denise and Jean are providing. And we urge you to, if you want to, participate in the research call that they've asked for. We got to get the shameless plugs in there, but it's important that we help give guidance from our community and participate in research to make this all of these resources even better. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.